Tonight, you'll never guess the group in society facing the fastest growing number of hate crimes. It's March 29th, and this is the Ezra Levant Show. This free episode of the Ezra Levant Show is brought to you by...
If you want to look good and shine like me, you can do so at our store. Go to ribbonnewstore.com. On this website, you have so much different style to wear, as this one, my favorite one, Justin Castro. With my code Alexa10, you will have 10% off on your next purchase. So don't hesitate, go now and look so good like me.
Shame on you, you censorious thug. What is a hate crime? Do you actually know? I think it's tough to say, really. I think a lot of criminals have hate in their heart when they commit a crime. I suppose hate and rage are not exactly the same thing, but they're close. We generally don't criminalize emotions or feelings. We criminalize violent expressions of emotions or feelings. Part of being a grown-up in control of yourself is to take your negative feelings and control them and maybe even transform them into something positive. There's no human being who does not occasionally hate something or hate someone. If you never feel that feeling, you might actually have a personality disorder, I think. It's unnatural never to feel bad feelings. So how can hate be a crime? Well, I think it's often a political decision, don't you think? The female-to-male transgender murderer who shot 6 people in a Tennessee church school on Monday was clearly motivated by hate. Police said she wrote a manifesto to that effect, but then they later said they weren't going to release that manifesto. Oh, and now the media are saying her motives are unknown. Here's a headline by Reuters. Former Christian school student kills 3 children, 3 staff in Nashville shooting. Oh, got it. So the key identity, the most salient characteristic of the murderer was that she, the murderer, was Christian. It makes it sound like she was a Christian terrorist, not an anti-Christian terrorist, which she was. So I guess it's official. The media says she is not a hate criminal. No, sir. But this guy, the guy being thrown out of the Drag Queen Story Hour in Calgary a few weeks ago, he's a hate criminal.
I'm not. I'm voice memo. Okay. We don't have our cameras up. We are now calling the police. Stop. We have the police coming, so it is your choice to leave or deal with the police.
Very abusive in there.
We are going
For love is love.
So that's Pastor Derek Reimer, of course. He's being jailed, charged. They say they're looking at hate crime charges against him. He's a Christian pastor who peacefully protests a Drag Queen Story Hour. He was physically attacked, but that's not a crime, let alone a hate crime. Apparently his peaceful protest is the hate crime. You'll see in a moment in our interview today of how other peaceful protesters at the Ottawa School Board were attacked by transgender extremists. No arrest for them, of course. So what is a hate crime? Well, according to this Statistics Canada poster just published last week, it is, quote, both confirmed and suspected hate crime incidents, which doesn't really narrow it down, does it? In fact, it sort of expands it. A suspected hate crime incident. Because so many suspected hate crimes turn out to be hoaxes, don't they? And of course, just because you report something to police doesn't mean they're going to prosecute them, convict them. So this is a really inflated number, which makes sense because there is a huge industry based on there being hate crimes. But since supply exceeds demand, so many are just made up to justify a media narrative, to justify a budget, to justify demonizing people as haters, when they are really political contrarians or critics of Trudeau. Trudeau calls people haters all the time. Have you noticed?
Mais il y a aussi des gens qui sont farouchement opposés à la vaccination.
Qui sont extrémistes.
Qui croient pas dans la science, qui sont souvent misogynes, souvent racistes aussi.
But you know, individual people can get famous by claiming they were hate crime victims. They get sympathy, they get money, they get attention. Look at this story in the authoritative Wall Street Journal. Hate crime hoaxes are more common than you think. A political scientist found that fewer than 1 in 3 of 346 such allegations was genuine. I'll skip ahead to an interesting section in the report. The author's bigger concern, and rightly so, is the growing politicization of hate crimes, especially when they are directed at underrepresented groups and regardless of whether they in fact happened. The sad reality is that there is no shortage of individuals and entities with a vested interest in exaggerating racial tensions in the U.S., from civil rights organizations to corporate diversity officers to professors of race and gender studies. These alleged incidents are invariably seized upon by politicians and activists looking to feed a sacrosanct belief among liberals that discrimination and oppression are the main drivers of inequality. Quote, in the mainstream media, we hear almost constant talk about scary new forms of racism, white privilege, cultural appropriation, and subtle bigotry, Mr. Riley writes. Yet a huge percentage of the horrific hate crimes cited as evidence of contemporary bigotry are fakes. Well, absolutely. And even this poster is suspected hate crimes, not convicted. It makes sense. Trudeau himself has poured tens of millions of dollars into the hate crime industry. What's so weird about it is that he often hires haters to do it. It makes international news. Take a look at this. Canada cuts anti-racism program after lead consultant's vile tweets service. Laith Marouf tweeted a series of offensive anti-Semitic messages, spurring the federal government to cut funding to the initiative. Seriously. Or this woman, who's even more recent. El Gawabi, not the right person for Islamophobia job. Quebec Solidaire. Amira El Gawabi is another extremist who herself hates Quebec, and she was hired also by Trudeau to be an anti-hater. So weird. But let's ignore for now the definition of a hate incident or hate crime and how hate is a human emotion, not a crime in itself. And let's put aside the fact that a huge number of hate crimes are actually hoaxes. Sounds like a vast majority are hoaxes. I put it to you that a great number are hoaxes or exaggerations, but let's take it at face value. So who are the victims of this hate? Well, that's the Statistics Canada poster that I mentioned a moment ago. Here it is here, infographic, police reported hate crime in Canada 2021. It was just released last week, so it's the most current. So as you can see, the number of police-reported hate crimes increased 27% in the second year of the pandemic, they say. I'm not sure what the pandemic has to do with it, but I have an idea. I'll tell you in a minute. Do you see those red dots? It looks like hate crimes have actually skyrocketed under Justin Trudeau, up from 1,362 in Stephen Harper's last year to 3,360 in 2021. Yeah, I'm not sure what the pandemic has to do with it. I think it is more relevant that Trudeau has tried his best to divide us based on race and gender and sexual orientation and everything else. It's Trudeau, not the pandemic, to blame. He's divided us and attacked us and made it very lucrative for people to be offended, hasn't he? Now, if you look at the chart on the left, you see that hate crimes against black people were actually down 5% in that year. And the number of hate crimes, that's the number on the left-hand chart, and that's the actual number of reported hate crimes or suspected crimes, I think it's actually sort of low. I find it encouraging. So for black people, the total number in the entire country for the entire year was just over 600, real or suspected. Now, I don't want any hate crimes, of course, or any other crimes. But in a country of 38 million people, that's not even 2 a day in the whole country. It's not an epidemic, that's for sure. For Indigenous people, the grand total number looks like it is around 60 in the whole country, in the whole year. Again, I don't like any hate crimes, real or imagined, but I have to say those numbers sound low to me, especially considering Trudeau talks about it nonstop. Look at the chart on the right. That's by religion now. The first thing you'll notice is that the most hate-crimed group in Canada is actually the Jews. Raw numbers, it's almost 500, which is, I think it's actually high, given that Jews are not even 1% of the Canadian population. More Jews were targeted than any other religion combined. There's almost 2 million black people in Canada. For comparison, there's just over 350,000 Jews, and they had almost the same number of reported hate crimes. In fact, as you can see, Jewish hate crimes targeting Jews was up 47%. I wonder if Laith Marouf had a hand in that. Now, hate crimes against Jews were the most numerous, and they grew, according to this, by 47%. But look at who are the second most numerous, and whose numbers grew by a whopping 260%. Not Muslims, They were at just over 100 hate crimes. Again, I don't want any hate crimes against anyone, even though there were some very famous hate crime hoaxes in the Muslim community. But look at that Catholic number. Up 260% in 1 year, so much that their raw number vaulted them into second place. And just for a moment, look at the far bottom of the chart. Hate crimes against sexual orientation in 2021 were a grand total of 423. It was up, but neither in percentage terms nor in raw numbers up as much as hate crimes against Catholics. Again, I don't know how many of these cases were real and how many were hoaxes, but I do know that close to 100 churches in Canada were torched or vandalized in some other way after Trudeau whipped up public anger against them, claiming that the churches were to blame for crimes against Indigenous people. Gerald Butts even tweeted his support of the church torchings, or at least that he found them understandable. There was no condemnation, no RCMP press conference, no government commission into anti-Catholic bigotry, no special funding or investigations. Silence in the main. I'm against hate crimes against anyone. I'm against all crimes. I'm especially against hate crime hoaxes. Because, like, say, a false accusation of rape, they make people less likely to believe the real accusation of rape. A false hate crime report trivializes and devalues real victims. Justin Trudeau has presided over the doubling of hate crimes in Canada. And in 1 year alone, he presided over the 260% growth in hate crimes against Catholics. And not only does he not care, I think he sort of likes it. Stay with us for more. This free episode of the Ezra Levant Show is brought to you by...
Hey guys, sorry to interrupt. I bet this interruption from me is kind of annoying. I mean, frankly, I don't want to be here either. I loved the show you're watching, and I'd be slightly bothered having some journalist pop in to disrupt my viewing. So if you don't want this to ever happen to you again and just have me or somebody else show up in the middle of your show, please consider becoming a subscriber to Rebel News Plus, where you will get early and ad-free access to incredible premium Rebel News content just like this. It's easy and cheaper than Netflix. Just go to rebelnewsplus.com to join today. Thanks. And back to the show.
Well, for some people, the mask during the pandemic was, well, it was a solution. It was a prophylactic, as they say. It was a precaution. They were just following medical advice. The advice seemed to change from time to time, but if that's what they were told to do, they would do it. They were compliant citizens. And in a way, you have to salute them for being community-minded, or at least that's what they thought. But for other people, the mask was much more than that. It was a symbol. It was an identity. And once the rest of the world demasked, keeping their mask was a sign of their purity and how much more righteous they are and were than the rest of us. Some people, I think, went a little bit far to the point where it was a symbol of maybe being a little bit off balance. One such person in my mind is Dr. Elie Kaplan-Myrth, who did this bizarre interview on TVO, which is the state broadcaster in the province of Ontario. It's like a provincial version of the CBC. So it's very sympathetic to government. Steve Paikin, who's a fairly independent-minded journalist over there, was interviewing Dr. Kaplan-Myrth, and he couldn't help himself. He just said, "Why are you wearing a mask on TV?" Let me show you that clip. It was quite something. Take a look.
We're all getting back to normal now, folks. So let's start there. Are we back to normal yet?
No. So the language that you use when you say something like normal is a far-right language of anti-maskers, anti-vaxxers, and ableists who disregard the impact of COVID on seniors, on children, on educators, on essential workers, on healthcare workers, on our healthcare crisis. There's nothing normal about getting COVID, repeated infections, children and adults being hospitalized, and long COVID. There's nothing normal about taking away the protections and the proactive measures that we had to help to reduce transmission of COVID. And there's nothing normal about getting rid of any kind of isolation requirements, which would have helped to curtail outbreaks in schools, in workplaces, and everywhere else that you go.
I mean, no disrespect in asking this, but we've obviously done hundreds of programs during the course of COVID-19, and I don't think we've ever had a guest who kept their mask on during the interview. So again, without prejudice, I merely ask, how come you're wearing yours now?
So let me explain. So I'm a doctor. I'm a family doctor. I see patients in my office. I just had patients who are in my office with their babies, and I have more patients coming in this afternoon. COVID is airborne. That means that COVID remains in the air even after you've left the room. I keep my mask on. It is a way to protect myself. It's a way to protect my patients. It's a way to protect my staff and the community. It is what healthcare providers across the world are saying that we should be doing. And it's really not a hardship. I wear my mask from the moment that I arrive in my office in the morning until the end of the day. It's a simple, safe, effective measure.
You know, good for him for asking. And her answer, I suppose, was about as reasonable as could be mustered. But we happen to know a little bit more about Dr. Kaplan-Myrth, and she is a mask extremist. In fact, she ran for the Ottawa School Board on a mask platform, which is absurd. There's no scientific basis for it, especially with regards to children who are practically immune to the virus. And if they do catch the virus, it's almost never serious. It's an ideological flag, I tell you. And that flag was enough to muster support for Dr. Kaplan-Myrth to be elected to that board, where she could wreak her, it's a little bit of Munchausen disease, I think, a little bit of hypochondria, which is always worrisome in a doctor. I'm not the only person to share that view. There were hundreds of people who actually showed up at the school board meeting last night, not just to talk about Dr. Kaplan-Myrth, but to talk about transgenderism in schools. Now, what I'm about to show you are some citizen journalist videos filmed outside the school board meeting. And what you're about to see is more violence and criminality last night than during the entire trucker convoy, and yet somehow neither the police nor the, martial law were imposed. Take a look at how violence from the left, from the Elie Kaplan-Myrth team, responded to parents who were skeptical about this authoritarianism or about transgenderism. Take a look.
16-year-old, 17 actually.
Support trans kids! 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 Hope we get arrested. Support trans kids! Support trans kids! Support trans kids! Support trans kids!
You might recall that young man, Josh Alexander. I interviewed him a few days ago at the True North Strong and Free conference. He had coffee thrown at him by protesters. He had a red hat on. I've seen that red hat. It does not say "Make America Great Again." I think it has a Canadian comment on it. But of course, that red hat was like red to a bull. And the pro-mask, pro-trans crowd there were abusive to him and got physical. Here's another senior citizen assaulted at the same protest by a trans activist. Police were there, but they refused to get involved. Take a look.
Do not touch him. Don't touch him. Hey! This guy just shoved the old guy right down onto the ground. Really? Well, come on. No, man. We got it on video.
More violence in those 10 seconds than in the 10 weeks of the truckers combined. Well, very interesting things are afoot. Hundreds, in fact, thousands of people signed a petition to revoke the council status of that Dr. Elie Kaplan-Myrth. I don't think an online petition has any legal force or effect, but it was symbolic. But then things got even stranger. Joining us now via Skype from Ottawa to talk about this is a new guest from our favorite place, True North, TNC.news. Elie Cantin-Nantel is the Ottawa reporter for True North, and he joins us today. Elie, nice to meet you. We've met in person, but this is the first time you're on the show. What a pleasure to have you. We love True North, and we're delighted you're with us.
Well, thank you for having me, Ezra. I'm a big fan of yours as well, and I look forward to discussing what's on the agenda today.
Well, it's great to see you. I refer to your article. We'll put it on the screen. It says multiple petitions demand resignation of controversial Ottawa school trustee. Now, we love petitions here at Rebel News, and sometimes they can actually have a real impact. I don't think you're going to get a mask school trustee to resign because anti-maskers don't like it. I mean, I think she probably revels in that. But what was so interesting here, I think, Elie, is that the website that hosted this petition is called change.org, and they have petitions for anything, for anyone. They took it down because Dr. Kaplan-Murth demanded they take it down. Someone put it back up, and then they took it down again as if it was some terrorist screed, simply opposing transgenderism or masks. Well, you get canceled in 2023, don't you?
Yeah, well, actually, what's quite surprising, the first time I ever heard of change.org, which is an American big tech platform, was in 2016 after Trump won. A bunch of Hillary supporters put up a petition calling for the Electoral College to reject Donald Trump's victory and have elected Hillary Clinton because she had won the popular vote. That petition was not taken down. This, in many ways, was an attack on democracy because it was calling on the electors to go against their duty to choose who the people in their state had voted for. But that was allowed. There's been lots of other petitions on change.org calling for politicians to resign, including another trustee on the board, Donna Blackburn, over an incident involving a black kid in a basketball court. There's been one calling for Kevin Vuong to resign in Toronto. And my first ever story at True North was about a change.org petition that had over 200,000 signatures calling for François Legault to resign amid his, harsh COVID measures. So it doesn't seem that petitions calling for elected officials is a no-go on change.org. It seems that petitions calling for Dr. Neely to resign, somebody who has shown that she cannot take criticism, despite taking criticism, is part of her job description. While that is unacceptable, you cannot call on her to resign because doing so is apparently a transphobic, anti-Semitic hate crime, and therefore it does not belong on change.org to call for a elected person who many constituents are frustrated with to step down.
Yeah, I saw the first petition and I didn't see anything hateful in it, let alone anything that would rise to the extremely high level required for a hate crime. I've read the criminal code provisions dealing with hate crimes. They are so, the requirements for them to be so extreme. There was nothing hateful here, although hate, I suppose, is a natural human emotion. I don't think you can ban human emotions. Did you see anything in the two petitions? And I mean, tell me if there was there anything that would that could rise to the standard of a hate crime? I noticed that the school board itself put out a lengthy press release denouncing the petition as a scurrilous attack. And it's almost as if when woke leftists are in power, they suddenly don't believe the right to speak truth to power. I mean, when Stephen Harper was prime minister, it was their patriotic duty not just to oppose, but to oppose vitriolically, to oppose with profanity, the FUCK Harper bumper sticker. But you have a woke leftist school board trustee, and even a peaceful online petition is now hate speech that must be deleted. I think these people really are authoritarian bullies.
Oh, for sure. I mean, you're right. When you look at, for example, Trump, I mean, the left was so vitriolic when it came to Trump. The F Trump was such a prominent thing there. The second petition, I actually spoke to the parent. It's a parent who lives in Dr. Neely Kaplan-Murth's zone. And he said that he's been frustrated with her. He feels quite uncomfortable with her being the trustee because she does not listen to his concern and to the concern of other parents. And I've heard a lot of other parents tell me similar things when I was doing a story on the mask issue when that was a thing. But the parent told the people on the petition, and he told me he specifically worded the petition so that it sounds neutral and that it focuses solely on what he believes are violations of the code of conduct. And he asked people to be nice. And in fact, he even told me that he doesn't support the hate that she's been receiving, because she has, Ezra, been receiving a lot of very awful, death threats and stuff that are unacceptable. And he pointed that out and he said, no, I don't support that. And he asked the people to be kind. But a nice, kind petition that is just requesting, not even requesting the resignation, is apparently hate speech. And yes, she loves to use her power, as it's been seen, to shut people down. And on Twitter, she has gone after a lot of people, including parents and constituents. And yeah, it does kind of come off as authoritarian, to be honest.
Yeah, I think she's a cry bully. She bullies others and compels them to wear masks, and yet if anyone criticizes her, she's so thin-skinned. One of the issues that worries me is the violence that is now associated with the authoritarian left. I mean, they've always been authoritarian, but they've never engaged in general Antifa tactics. But what scares me is we saw in the United States a female to male transgender radical with a political manifesto just burst into a school and a church and killed 6 people with a gun. And I see that even in Canada, you see trans activists wearing shirts with pictures of guns or knives on them. And we haven't seen guns or knives used in Canada yet, but we saw pushing, shoving, shouting, throwing coffee, throwing food, nothing that has yet injured anyone. But I find the contrast so stark because just last year, honking horns was considered a national emergency and more than 1,000 cops were deployed to the streets. Here you have pushing, shoving, shouting, bullying, and the cops don't care. I think that Ottawa is becoming, I'm not going to call it a lawless place. I'm going to call it a place where they check your political stripe before they decide whether or not to enforce the law. I'm really worried about Ottawa and Calgary, for that matter, where similar things have happened. Derek Reimer was violently attacked by trans activists. No charges against his attackers, charges against him. I'm worried we're starting to lose equality before the law, Elie.
Yes, there's a few things that I will say there. I mean, first of all, I think there's a distinction between people who are experiencing gender dysphoria and maybe have concluded as adults that it may be best for them to transition to improve their quality of life, and the radical trans activists. Many of them are not even transgender themselves. And yes, I think from what we've seen in the US and the Trans Day of Vengeance that's apparently coming up, and the shirts with the knives and the guns, it's concerning because this is an extremist agenda. It's not a mainstream human rights agenda. There are transgender people who are advocating for dignity and respect across the world. Many of these far left activists are not doing that. They're advocating for a completely different type of agenda. And there is a double standard that is present that is concerning. Like we saw in the US, had this been a white right-wing Christian man that had gone into a school and shot up trans kids, this would have been a much bigger story. There would have been mass outrage, rightly so, because that would have been a hate crime and that would have been wrong. However, when you have it the other way around, and you have a trans person go into a Christian school and kill Christian kids, the media doesn't mention that they're trans, doesn't mention that at all. And the trans lobby actually doesn't want the manifesto taken out. We saw this in Ottawa too. Had it been a convoy person that had assaulted a trans activist, it would have been all over the media. The legacy media, CBC, CTV, I checked their articles about last night's meeting. Not a word about the assaults from the trans activists. And this type of double standard is concerning because one side, the right, wars are considered to be violent. Honking is considered to be violent. We are put under this extreme pressure when you're on the right that you have to be perfect because one little thing will screw everything up. Meanwhile, you're on the left, you get to assault minors, you get to assault senior citizens, you get to scream profanity, and you're basically facing no consequences. And that is very concerning. And you're right, it's not just happening in Ottawa, it's happening across North America. because wokeness is plaguing our institutions. And that's what wokeness does. Wokeness has no set of morality. Wokeness is a subjective concept where there are certain rights and certain wrongs, and what is considered right and wrong changes on a daily basis according to what fits the political narrative.
You know, I note that usually when there is a mass shooting in the United States, Justin Trudeau tweets about it. And you might think, well, why would the Canadian Prime Minister tweet about a mass shooting in a foreign country? I get a real vibe whenever he does that it's his way of saying, oh, I really care about you, but wink, wink, we need gun control in Canada. It always feels like there's a collateral motive. But I noticed that this mass shooting, and it's at a school, and there's kids who were killed, and normally this would be one of his weepy tweets where he sort of shows his moral superiority. I noticed he didn't tweet about this mass shooting, and I think it is exactly because it was a woke transgender activist committing political terrorism. I think that that's exactly why, and he only cares if the perpetrator is someone that he can loathe. I don't think he actually cares about the victims. That's my thoughts. Elie, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Keep up the great reporting. We'll be following this story because I think that when you have hundreds of people going to a school board, I think that's actually good news. It means these things are no longer be done in secret and parents are getting involved. And maybe this Nili Kaplan-Murth might be elected this time, but I think if you wake the sleeping giant of those parents, I think they'll throw these woke trustees out, and that's what I hope will happen. Last word to you, Elie.
Well, thanks for having me, Ezra. I just want to give a bit of perspective on why this lady was elected, I guess, if I may. She's well known in Ottawa. She ran something called Javapalooza, where she gave thousands and thousands of vaccines. And she lives in the neighborhood right next to mine. Both are kind of upscale, liberal neighborhoods. So many people just recognized her as the lady who gave their kids their vaccines. An average person is not on Twitter looking at her insane tweets. Next time around, though, I think people are starting to realize that under her, things have been disruptive. The police have been called several times now for issues related to her. But it remains to be seen, ideally, by the next election. First of all, will she run again? And second of all, will she be reelected? Only time will tell.
Yeah. Well, thanks for taking the time, and we'll continue to watch your reports at True North, which is tnc.news. There you have it. Elie Cantin-Nantel, if I'm pronouncing it right. What a good egg. And we look forward to talking to him again. Stay with us. More ahead. This free episode of the Ezra Levant Show is brought to you by...
Checked out the fresh new swag we have at rebelnewsstore.com, like this nifty Resistance trucker sweater. We have warm, cozy sweaters, t-shirts, mugs, hats, phone cases, you name it. Everything to fit your freedom-loving needs, or maybe even trigger a liberal family member or friend. And for a limited time, you can use code TAMARA10 at checkout to save 10% off of your total order. So head on over to rebelnewsstore.com, check out all of our new designs, make some purchases, and use code TAMARA, that's TAMARA 10 at checkout for 10% off your order. Head on over, check it out.
Hey, welcome back. Your letters to me. 2022 from vaccines to drag queens says no history of mental illness was part of the report, yet Rebel and a few commentators on here keep claiming the shooter was mentally ill. Being transgender is not a mental illness. A mental illness is when a person is thinking or acting in a way they have little or no control over. Being transgender is a direct choice a person makes, a planned out attack on their own body, just as the shooter had planned this attack on the people in this school. It is not a mental illness. Calling it a mental illness is making the transgender person out to be a victim of their own circumstances. They are certainly not a victim. They have made a very intentional, evil choice. It's a very interesting point of view you have, and I'm going to chew it over in my mind a bit. But I think that with many people, they are victims because they have been propagandized and directed and manipulated when they were just kids. Like you see children of tender years at some of these drag queen story hours. They're in grade schools, not just high schools. Now, the murderer in Nashville was in her 20s, so she was obviously a grown-up. And yes, we have to make sure that we don't exculpate her from her own decisions. That's true. But when was she worked over by the system? Was she misled? Was she torqued by an activist doctor? Don't know, but I take your point. John Cheresna says, in my humble opinion, it is only a matter of time before those that were forced into transitioning, because it was more of a fad than a fact, will seek revenge on those that did the forcing. Oh, it's the most horrific thing is the surgery, because there's no coming back from it. You know, I remember a few years ago, I cited a study paid for by an LGBTQ plus organization. So it was a very sympathetic study. It was not a reactionary study that showed that the drugs and the surgery made kids even more likely to commit suicide, which seems to make sense, because if you have troubles in your life, if you're disturbed, if you're off balance, if you're off kilter, and you're told, well, cut off your breast, cut off your genitalia, that'll fix it, and you do that extreme thing, and it doesn't make you feel better, well, what have you done to yourself? It really is no less insane than cutting off a limb. We are in the darkest days. That's our show for today. Until tomorrow, on behalf of all of us here at Rebel World Headquarters, to you at home, good night, and keep fighting for freedom.